Thank you very much for inviting me along. I'd like to rather follow on a little from that panel conversation. First of all, a little about me. I'm provost at Coventry. I've been at Coventry for an enormous amount of time. I describe myself as a lifer. I'm incredibly proud of the journey that we've been on at Coventry University. Coventry University is, in UK terms, a relatively large university with 36,000 students on 5 sites in the UK, 20,000 students studying in transnational partnership in about 20 partners around the world, 100,000 open online learners so far this year, with another expected 50,000 to start on open free courses through our Coventry University online subsidiary. More importantly, I wanted to talk about the diversity of our student population. We are a third of my students are from 150 countries around the world. Of the 24,000 students who are UK domicile, 52% are Black, Asian, minority ethnic. 10% come from each of the 10 indices of deprivation, from the most to the least affluent. Teresa said that we need to understand our data, we need to understand our populations. I think it's absolutely essential, and that's really what I want to focus on. Understanding the population in order to be able to personalise learning so that students are able to achieve to the maximum of their ability. Why is that important? It's really important because in UK higher education and in higher education around the world, there are attainment gaps. There are certain populations achieve much less well beyond the statistically describable limits, and that's not acceptable. There are certain universities where the attainment gap for a black male student are significantly, very significantly less good than for a white student, and that can't be acceptable in our higher education system. So, what are we doing? Like many universities, I think we're at the forefront of it, but we are looking really hard at the data, understanding the individuals that make up that data set, but most importantly, using the data of how our students engage with their learning as a proxy for understanding the student journey, so that we can nudge them back into engagement and make sure that we can recover students who perhaps are likely to drop out of their study. I see this as the very early stages, the foothills of a journey to personalise learning. And this journey then moves us from learner analytics, understanding the engagement of a student, into learning analytics, understanding how they learn, understanding at the moment they engage with a piece of content, how they're engaging with that content. Understand if they access a text, how long do they dwell on a particular page, and using that data in real time to navigate the student through their learning journey. Understanding that I can introduce a question. I can test whether a student understands a concept or a principle as I introduce that concept or principle. More importantly, I can understand how confident they feel about understanding that principle. And by using all of those data points, I can start to navigate the learner. I can scaffold the learner who I immediately spot who doesn't get it. I can stretch the learner who moves through content really quickly. And even more excitingly, I think, is if I identify a learner who is taking a particular route systematically through their learning, I know that that's not good for the breadth of their learning. I can stretch them off into different modes of learning at the moment that I need to do that. I can force them into different learning styles, perhaps that are more uncomfortable. Of course, by doing all of that, we generate enormous volumes of data. And that's obviously where our relationship with AWS becomes important, because how we manage that data and how we make sure that data is available in real time, how we understand which variables are important at a particular moment and how we switch them in and switch them out, because the journey and the way in which we navigate through that journey changes, becomes really important. And so the data analytics and the AI engine effectively that sits behind all of that stuff becomes really, really important. The third phase is to move into student well-being, to understand points of anxiety in learning. When do I become stressed about my learning journey, and how do I understand that? And with student permission, understanding through social media feeds and all sorts of other sources of data, I can sense points of stress, and I can help navigate the learner so that I can make sure that they achieve. The other point that I want to just make on that is that it's not only about using the proxies and the data that we have around the students, it's also understanding their expectations, allowing them to express their expectations, and then nudging their expectations. If I'm a higher education student, first generation higher education student, then my experience of higher education is limited to what's around me. If I'm a second or third or fourth generation higher education student, I have family expectations, and that needs to be navigated. I need to support the new learners into that journey to move them on. So understanding expectations and then helping stretch expectations is really important. Equally, making sure that the employers understand the value of, and so this is where I push my academic colleagues out into our industrial partners to stretch industry thinking about how diversity can really make a difference to them, and make sure that the points that were made in the panel earlier. I just want to mention two final things before I close. First of all, the global demand for higher education. Higher education is a cottage industry at the moment. You know, there are 30,000 higher education institutions on this planet. The really big ones, Paul LeBlanc at Southern New Hampshire University, for anyone that knows Paul, 3,000 students on campus, 135,000 learners online. Paul claims to be the largest single US institution. It's still tiny. It's still absolutely tiny. The UN tell us that we have 200 million learners in the higher education system at the moment, that we have demand for about 450 million by 2040. It's taken us 1,160 years to build the first 200 million places. I absolutely assure you we're not going to physically build the next 200 million in the next 20 years. Online and the digital routes to education are going to be really important. How do we make those valuable and equal in esteem to the on-campus, the boarding school model that's been traditional for the last period, I think is really, really important. I've been working with AWS for a period now, thinking about how we develop the $100 a month degree course. What is a $100 degree, a month degree course? What am I talking about here? The learner who is 30 years of age, who has a family and needs to develop their skill in a particular area, but lives on one side of Mexico City. And for those of you who know Mexico City, traveling across that city is challenging at any time. It is challenging across enough to get to this place. So, as many of you will have experienced. So how do you create that competence-based learning approach that really allows the learner to develop? How do you use the technology to support them in that journey? And how do you make sure that it's of equal value so that they're not seen as second-rate or third-rate as learners? And those questions, I think, are really important. And we're working with, Teresa mentioned Scott Rawls, the president of NOVA in North Virginia, and the associate's degree, looking at that and scouring the jobs market. So we take the data science and we look at what skills developments are required. We understand the skills that are coming out of universities, and we create a marketplace, effectively, that allow people to, through digital badging, to marry up the skills that they need in order to move on in career, the skills that are required in particular places, in particular industries, and we put them together, and we allow them to explore the market and see which ones are best value and best fit for them. That work is going to take a little time. It's really quite challenging. It's intellectually challenging as well as technically challenging. But I think those sorts of collaborations between organisations like AWS and many others, and universities and other public sector bodies are really powerful in making sure that we do address the point that Amanda made, which is that over that 50 or 60-year career that people are going to have in the next generation, that we need to be able to not only upskill, but reskill. And we have in our educational systems a belief that things always go on an escalator, they go up. Actually, we're going to have to change that thinking, or we're going to have to move across disciplines, and that might mean that we cross-skill and reskill in a very different way. And therefore, I think we need to find some very different models to allow us to do that. to address that need for the next 200 million places that we have to build in the next 20 years. Thank you very much.